Listen, Bob Iger jumped up on his desk and started tap dancing when this controversy started because it gave him a morality clause breach against Kimmel to terminate his contract a year early when he's losing money.
The FCC is not supposed to be engaged in the nuances of content moderation.
It also means that both sides have been correct at a certain point, right? So what we need to do is make them be correct at the same time.
You know, Bob Iger is negotiating heavily with Nexstar right now to try to put a happy ending on all this, because Bob Iger doesn't want champion of censorship to be stapled to his obituary when he leaves.
And the only thing I've heard this whole time with even Ben Smith and everybody is the assumption that is true, despite the evidence suggesting it played a minimal role.
Dennis Miller, Michael Richards, Kill Tony. I'm sure a lot of that caused Joe Biden a lot of pain.
I don't believe everything I read in reporting. I think for myself.
Indeed. So you make things up, I guess.
This was about putting a merger through. Bob Iger was looking at the stock price. He wanted to make this merger go through, and he made the Kimmel problem go away because he was hinted to do that by the government.
But it is still deeply unconstitutional and immoral for the president to silence his enemies.
They said, okay, your show dropped 43% over 1 month. Maybe we shouldn't do this anymore.
Oh, we could do this the easy way or the hard way. And then a few hours later, Jimmy Kimmel's no more.
Is the president suffering right now from being made fun of?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Piers Morgan Uncensored and another chance that I get to come in from 20,000 feet with hindsight and make the arguments and kind of knock some of this nonsense down. I love coming in after the fact when they're making debate arguments and I get to prove somebody wrong. I just love that. Look, I'm sorry, but hey, I like winning. Who doesn't like winning? But it is what it is. And we're going to get into all this. This is a very fascinating debate talking about Jimmy Kimmel, as you saw with that intro. So we're going to get into this. You got Tim Pool coming in and kind of destroying the arguments here, or at least that's my perspective on it. He kind of destroys everything, so it is what it is. This other guy, I forget his name right off the top. I apologize for that. He makes a pretty good argument too, but he's lying. So once again, you can't win a debate when you lie in that debate. So it is what it is. We're going to get into that. Y'all do me that favor. Smash that like button for me. Subscribe if you want to stay up to date with news and politics, because that's what we do. We read the news, folks, and we talk about it. We figure out how we're being manipulated. So y'all do that. Share this video anywhere and everywhere you can and click that join button, sign up, and become a member. That's the best way to help this channel expand and grow. But without any further ado, here's the debate.
Kat, let me start with you, because I do think the Kimmel story is quite a complex one. Instinctively, we all believe in free speech. Instinctively, we don't like to see people cancelled for just having an opinion. And people on the right have been particularly exercised about this rightly because of the way the woke left have behaved with cancel culture for years. But you were interesting on Gutfeld. You said that while you were disgusted by the comment that Kimmel made, the FCC's actions bothered you as well. And Ted Cruz has said similar, as have others on the right. I think Ben Shapiro did too. Just explain why what the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, said publicly bothered you.
Yeah, the FCC is not supposed to be engaged in the nuances of content moderation. The public interest statute's not been interpreted this way before. For me, it's pretty simple. He's talking about, oh, we could do this the easy way or the hard way. And then a few hours later, Jimmy Kimmel's no more. And this is especially concerning given the fact that Nexstar is looking for the FCC to approve a merger that would make them a lot of money. I simply don't see that as a coincidence. And I simply do not think that that is appropriate or good to have the FCC, an arm of the federal government, engaging in content moderation in that way, regardless of how you feel about Jimmy Kimmel, regardless of how you feel about what he said. And I heard what Bill O'Reilly just said about how you can't imagine how he went forward with that statement saying that, hey, there's just kind of essentially saying it's delusional to believe that the shooter was anything but MAGA. And I honestly think that that's because maybe he kept himself in such a bubble that he didn't even have anyone who would moderate him and saying, hey, we don't know yet, or something along those lines. But to me, that's all irrelevant. To me, I've spent my entire career espousing the importance of free speech. It's easy for me to say, hey, when the FCC has this influence, that's not a good thing. And it's been disheartening to see people on the right who have behaved as though they don't even know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Employees have consequences for their employers. What do you mean? And they don't even bring up the FCC angle. I think there's people out there that don't even know about the FCC angle because so many people talk about it as if, so just let me know if you think that this whole FCC thing is just a coincidence out of all the things that Jimmy Kimmel's ever said about conservatives, which there are many. After the FCC says this, that's when this happens, especially with this merger on the line. If you think that's just a coincidence, then let me know. But I don't think it's just a coincidence. But also tell me to my face that you can't possibly see how I might think that one thing has to do with the other.
Okay, so once again, in hindsight, that's just kind of a bad take because look what happened. Jimmy Kimmel came back. How'd that threat from Brendan Carr work out? But I like how she says, well, the FCC shouldn't be going around, regulating content moderation, for crying out loud. Like, what are you talking about? That's their main function. As a matter of fact, you go Google, what is the main function of the FCC? As a matter of fact, I'll read it out to you guys. The main function of the Federal Communications Commission is to regulate communications by radio, television, wire, satellite, and cable across the United States and its territories established by the communications, blah, 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 oversees the development and enforcement of policies to ensure access to communication services, promote competition, manage the radio frequency spectrum, and protect consumers from harmful practices in the communications sector. This includes licensing broadcasters, regulating internet and phone services, and addressing issues like net neutrality and public safety communications. So what are you talking about? They don't regulate television. Right? We can go back to that and say that, and protects consumers from harmful practices. Don't you think that lying about an assassination would be a harmful practice? Don't you think that, trying to say things that are going to piss off half the country and, ostracize yourself from that market will lose you revenue? Don't you think that would be a little bit harmful to your company? I'm just saying, I just don't find that argument very compelling at this point, considering the fact that they brought Jimmy Kimmel back, for goodness sakes. Like, how did that work out for you? And let's not pretend, by the way, that Brendan Carr showing up on The Benny Show, of all places, a podcast, making some statements as Brendan Carr. He didn't make those statements as the chair of the FCC. It would be a different story if he come out, made a statement like a press release, a press conference or something like that, and made those statements. That has a whole different set of circumstances related to that, right? Like, there's a whole lot more weight if he comes out in his official capacity and makes a statement like that. But he's in his personal capacity on a right-wing podcast, for crying out loud, and he's just talking. That's it. They were talking about a whole bunch of different things. But look, the fact is, and we'll get into this, that Jimmy Kimmel made a mistake. And just like Tucker Carlson getting fired, just like Roseanne Barr getting fired, these things happen, folks. You can get mad about it, but these things happen. People say things, and, the populace reacts however they're going to react. And it is what it is. You must live with those consequences. But for Jimmy Kimmel, those consequences were nothing. Were absolutely nothing. A brief suspension is not going to hurt his bottom line. Not at all. He's still on the air, so it is what it is. But let's keep going.
Interviewed Jay Leno about a year and a half ago, and he was really interesting about...
Wow.
Yeah, it was actually great. I went to his car garage in LA. We had a great few hours. I loved it. But cool. What I liked about what he said was, he believed in, teasing and gently mocking all politicians from all sides.
Correct.
And he talked about the kind of real sort of golden period of Johnny Carson. Nobody knew Johnny Carson's politics at all. And yet, if you've watched late night comedy in America in the last 10 years, since Trump became a politician, All of them, almost to, I mean, they're all middle-aged white guys, which always makes me laugh when you think about the diversity push, which never seemed to attack late-night comedy. But they all, to me, developed an increasing loathing of Trump, which began to really distort what their actual job was, which was to make Americans laugh late at night. I stopped watching them quite a long time ago. I could not watch it. Jimmy Fallon, I would kind of keep out of this. I think he's always been a lighter touch, but I think Kimmel and I think Colbert in particular, they really went hard in the anti-Trump rhetoric. The View, it doesn't have alternate views. It has one view. They all hate Trump.
Very
they all
funny
They all
show,
came out
though.
in black funereal clothes after he won again. And I don't think these serve their viewers, and I don't think they serve their companies. But I also feel uneasy, as Kat said, about the FCC poking its nose publicly into making not even veiled threats, but direct threats that if ABC, Disney didn't take action against Kimmel, then they were going to pay the consequences. So where do you sit with all this?
Listen, I'm new to your audience, so just to introduce myself, I am a tell it like it is comedian, and no one's safe from my jokes, be it bratty kids, celebrities, politicians, people that just walk by. They're all fair game, but it is still deeply unconstitutional and immoral for the president to silence his enemies. But I think what's important now, especially because it's so crazy right now, is that we zoom out as like people, like human beings. And like, there's a lot of kind of empathy being expressed towards Kimmel right now. But where's the empathy for Donald Trump? Certainly what it seems like to me is that he feels like he's been bullied. And I've been a victim of bullying my entire life, and still I am regularly. I'm on the internet. But I've always said to my bullies, like, while it's disrespectful, rude, hurtful for them to be saying that, I support their constitutional right to be saying things about me that aren't true. So, previous Democratic administrations have gotten the same treatment from conservative comics like Dennis Miller, Michael Richards, Kill Tony. I'm sure a lot of that caused Joe Biden a lot of pain, but never were their constitutional rights violated by the executive branch of the government. And I think that is what the clear difference is here. And I think for all of us as a culture, we have to ask ourselves, like, is the president suffering right now from being made fun of? And the truth is this, like 30% of Americans suffer from depression, and there's a stigma. And if that is indeed true, like he should feel equipped to get help. And it is a
All right,
public
I
risk.
detect a slight sarcasm to your
I'm not.
tone.
I'm not. No.
Well, no,
Listen,
here's the
not
point I've made. I don't think Trump feels bullied or hurt or any of those things. I think what he feels.
So why?
Here's what I think he
okay.
feels. So he actually spelled it out in the last few days. There's no doubt, as he said, that about 99% of all the coverage of Trump on all these late night shows and The View and all these other mainstream media shows has been Trump bashing. It's never been that percentage historically with anybody else. It was never like that with Obama. It wasn't like it with Reagan. It wasn't like it with Clinton. It's never been so skewed. I think Donald Trump brings a lot of it on himself, but I also think there's no doubt, no one can argue to me sensibly, that Trump has not had a more relentlessly vicious, negative treatment from shows that used to be much more bipartisan in their mockery than Trump. So I think that all these things can be true, right? But
he also comes from television, right? And so it's something that he pays close attention to.
Yeah.
Ratings, he talks about they're being very unfair to me, unfair treatment. This is something that he is like locked in on constantly. So, I mean, to some extent, if these are low-rated shows that are taking jabs at him, vicious jabs sometimes, that doesn't really pose much of a threat to his power if not a lot of people are watching them. But for him, it's something that he's like zoned in on, perhaps.
Okay, so I got to address two things that are really, really major problems with this. Well, one really major problem, and just one I want to address, because Piers makes a really good point right there that, okay, so these people have been consistently bashing Trump for the last 10 years, and now all of a sudden he wants to try to take their First Amendment rights away? All of a sudden, now that this guy makes a statement about somebody else, about Charlie Kirk, essentially, about that whole situation, right? And then try to pretend that what he is insinuating there, that's not what I meant to say. Well, what exactly did you mean to say, my dude? Not apologizing for this at all. Doubling down on it. Yeah, I love that. These MAGA trying to pretend that it wasn't one of theirs. What's the insinuation from that? That they weren't trying to pretend anything. They weren't trying to insinuate that this guy was. Nope, they were telling everybody, this has got to come to a stop. This left-wing lunatic took one of our people out. Somebody that just wants to sit down and have a discussion. But now, all of a sudden, he wants to sick the FCC on him? No, I'm sorry. Get out of here. Plus, let's not pretend that that Donald Trump actually went to Brendan Carr and said, shut them down. Go on the Benny show, of all places, and threaten to pull their license. I mean, are we going to pretend that Trump did that? Like, seriously with this. And then let's take it back to something he said in there. Check this out.
So, previous Democratic administrations have gotten the same treatment from conservative comics like Dennis Miller, Michael Richards, Kill Tony. I'm sure a lot of that caused Joe Biden a lot of pain, but never were their constitutional rights violated by the executive branch of the government.
Okay, so what? What are we talking about here? So it's okay to do it to the small man, just to the regular citizen, but it's not okay when it's done to Jimmy Kimmel, right? Because we know for a fact that Joe Biden's administration had backdoor access to every single social media platform in this country, plus. And they silenced voices. That is direct government intervention to silence speech. Are you still going to try to pretend that the Biden administration was this champion of free speech, that they did not violate thousands of people's First Amendment rights? Are we trying to pretend this? Right? Once again, a lot of people don't know this because this is one of those stories that selectively get overlooked by the mainstream news. Oh, well, we don't feel like covering this. Oh, and it's just alleged, blah, 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 because the corporate press, we know, their narrative is always Republicans are evil. And, Democrats, not so much. Yeah, not so much. They're not so evil. Yeah, they do things we may not like, but Democrats are always good. And Republicans are always evil. That's the corporate press narrative in every single news article that they publish, or at least every single news article that I've ever read. I'll put it that way, because I haven't read every single news article that they've published, but every one that I've read gives this air of Republicans are evil, if they don't just outright say it. But let's not pretend that the Biden administration was this champion of free speech, that they did not go after just your average everyday American and silence their speech. Why didn't we hear about it all that much? Well, we did. But once again, the corporate press, the mainstream news, they just didn't cover it heavily because it, once again, falls outside of the narrative that Democrats are good and Republicans are evil. That's it, folks. But they did. You can go look it up. They were sued heavily for this. As a matter of fact, RFK Jr. exposed most of this in his lawsuit. And then it was found later that, yes, they actually did violate the First Amendment rights of many Americans. For, once again, they would make posts that were just facts a lot of times, quoting CDC statistics or data or whatever it may be. Science. Yeah, they got silenced for the truth in many cases. In this case, you can't really say it was the FCC. Did it play a role? Yeah, sure, probably. I'm not going to deny that outright because I'm not going to deny reality. But I'm also not denying the reality that the reporting around this is that the executives went to Jimmy Kimmel and asked him to apologize, and he refused. the Nexstar and Sinclair, which Nexstar capitulated. I think it's Nexstar that capitulated. Maybe it was Sinclair that capitulated and actually brought him back on the air, but one or the other hasn't yet, and they're still not airing Jimmy Kimmel. It's the advertisers, folks. The advertisers are the ones with the money. Money talks and BS walks. Let's keep going.
Nobody supported Sharon. She got suspended. She then got bullied into making a tearful apology, sort of begging for mercy, really, over nothing. She'd done nothing wrong other than show me support as a friend. We used to work together on America's Got Talent. And then she got fired anyway. But what I remember most of all about it, nobody on the liberal left gave a damn that Sharon Osbourne's career got ruined in that way on American television, simply for saying that I hadn't said racist things when I hadn't. So there's a lot of double standards about all this. It's like, depending who you are. When Tucker Carlson, I showed earlier with Bill O'Reilly a clip of Jimmy Kimmel gleefully celebrating Tucker Carlson being fired, gleefully celebrating Roseanne Barr being fired from ABC and so on. So it's interesting to me to see who people race to defend when it comes to free speech. There's a lot of hypocrisy. What do you think?
If I may, Roseanne was fired by a private corporation for making racist comments that would hurt that corporation's bottom line, and Tucker Carlson was fired for repeated lies that cost his private corporation $750 million. They were not fired because of abuse of power, which is the case here.
But is it the case? Okay, but John, is it the case here? Or could it be that Kimmel did exactly what you've just articulated? He was hitting his company on the bottom line. Local TV station owners were pulling the plug. They were saying, we don't want to air him. In other words, is it not the same thing? But because he's a liberal, darling left guy, everyone's framing it in a different way.
No, this was government. This was abuse of power. This was Brendan Carr saying the quiet part out loud in public, which was very stupid of him because it's going to make sure this issue never goes away. At least with Colbert, they kept this on the down low. If you actually look at Kimmel's comments, I don't really understand why there hasn't been a more forceful defense mounted. He said that MAGA folks spent the weekend trying to assert that this killer was not one of theirs, and then said they spent the weekend trying to blame everybody else. That's really a very fair comment. It was in no way besmirching Mr. Kirk or the grief that many people were feeling. There's been a lot of exploitation over this, and whenever anything of this kind of violence happens, it always brings out the best in some people and the worst in others, and many of us on the left and right will exploit any tragedy to go ahead and hate on the people we already hate. In this case, however, this was going to happen no matter what. And Brendan Carr has always envisioned this. He is an architect of Project 2025. These other cases you talk about are private corporations. And look, this administration has taken a lot of pleasure in a lot of Americans losing their job. They take delight in it. And there's a lot of talented people who work on this show that I hope will not be losing their jobs, because you know Bob Iger is negotiating heavily with Nexstar right now to try to put a happy ending on all this, because Bob Iger doesn't want champion of censorship to be stapled to his obituary when he leaves. When Michael Eisner is the voice of morality against Bob Iger, my God, what have we come to? Kimmel's going to be fine. He'll find a job somewhere, as will Colbert. They're very, very wealthy. But this is something that's unprecedented. We haven't seen the government doing this. And in both cases, they were contingent on bribes. This is more corruption that we're all used to in this country. This was about putting a merger through. Bob Iger was looking at the stock price. He wanted to make this merger go through, and he made the Kimmel problem go away because he was hinted to do that by the government. This is self-cancellation by intimidation. It's grotesquely against the First Amendment, and these guys are not going to look good in the history books for doing it.
I love that. So how's that intimidation narrative working out for you, my dude? Seriously. Like, they're trying to make this argument that Brendan Carr was some mafioso guy working for the mob boss Trump over here, and they intimidated them into taking old Jimmy Kimmel off the air. Oh, poor Jimmy Kimmel. Well, how'd that work out, my dude? Because they brought him back. Within 6 days, or at 6 days exactly, brought him back. After a relentless campaign from the left, after ABC affiliate stations getting shot up, after thousands upon thousands of threats to not only the affiliate stations and ABC themselves, but people, just regular run-of-the-mill people that work at those affiliate stations, that work for ABC. After I don't know how many threats. So hang on just a second. Who is the more intimidating force here? Considering they brought Jimmy Kimmel back, who is the more intimidating force, my dude? I think the left right now. They fear the violence more than they fear the weight of the federal government, folks. And what does that tell you about the modern day left in this country? That they have no fear whatsoever about threatening anyone and everyone into submission. Now, who's the mafioso boss here? You think it's old Brendan Carr at the FCC? Or is it the left? Or is it this group of people out there that think that they can just run amok, unfettered, threaten people with terrorism and get away with it? Well, they have been getting away with it, so I don't see why anyone wouldn't think that they could get out there and go do that. They've been getting away with it for years and years and years. But as we've seen with the Trump administration must put a stop to this. He must bring the foot down, just bring the hammer down on these people. We cannot have a society where people cannot conduct whatever they want to conduct, do whatever they want to do without fear of threats from violence from one side or the other, right? Because I'm not denying that the far right doesn't have any threats of violence out there, right? They do. But once again, you know, the far right are obscure and ostracized from polite society, if you will. Is the far left? No. Do we see any Democratic politicians condemning Antifa? Do we? We don't, as a matter of fact. Do we see any Democratic politicians condemning BLM or the Summer of Love or any violence? Do we see them condemning any of that stuff? We'll see them condemning specific instances, like Audrey Hale, for crying out loud, for shooting up a Catholic school and killing children. Yeah, we'll see. Oh, we condemn all political violence. Well, they try to say that, but do they condemn Antifa or BLM? No, they don't, folks. As a matter of fact, they spur on this rhetoric. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez espoused some of the same, most of the same views that Charlie Kirk's assassin espoused. As a matter of fact. I mean, are we going to pretend that the left is not committing much, much more violence in this current moment? Let's say for the past year or so, just the past year. Let's look at that for a second. It's been nothing but left-wing violence, for crying out loud. Nothing but. Got maybe one or two little blips for the right, and that's it. Everything else has been from the left. Look at all the Tesla terrorism that was going on. I mean, were we in fear at all from the right for that? Look at all the terroristic activities that's been going on. Most of it can be aligned with the left. Most all of it can be aligned with the left. That's fascinating, folks. So who is the one posing the threat here? You think it's the FCC? Yeah, right. You need to come back to reality, folks. Let's keep going.
Really, no. It may be that ABC and Disney just concluded the commercial heat from the fallout of what he said. And I actually think that's a really good point by Jeff Dye. You know, if you had been on air, if you'd been on air on Gutfeld in the week after George Floyd was murdered, I'm sure you were, but if you cracked a joke, well, it wasn't really even a joke. And that's why...
It wasn't about...
But that's why, Jeff, I mean, the point that John made, I've seen someone trying to explain how it wasn't the way it seemed. I haven't heard this from Jimmy Kimmel yet, but apparently he was trying to explain that.
To me,
he was just revealing this is what the right were doing. But it wasn't a joke, and it was crass, wasn't it?
But to me, the one difference here is the FCC. You can point to whatever other example of any other comment, whether it's something that actually happened or whether it's a hypothetical, and it's still going to be a different situation because it's not a cancellation that happened just a matter of hours after the FCC was using that threatening language. And you can talk all you want about the local stations pulling out, but Nexstar was looking for a merger. They're looking to get rich off this. They're gonna do what the FCC says. If people would like to believe that's a coincidence, that's fine. I don't believe it's a coincidence when it's the one difference. When Jimmy Kimmel has been making these sorts of comments, jokes, some are just political commentary, going really hard against Trump, really hard against the right. And then the one thing that's really different this time is that just hours before, the head of the FCC was threatening that to me, that's what makes this different. And I'm not a Democrat. I'm not on the left. I'm not on the right either. I'm just an independent, and I'm a free speech advocate. And as a free speech advocate, if I cannot imagine having any other take, but at the very least, being able to understand how someone could possibly think that maybe this had something to do with it.
Yeah, Tim Pool, I got to say, it's a persuasive argument that Kat makes.
I don't think so. It's just not the reporting. I don't look. I certainly understand when Brendan Carr says.
I don't believe everything I read in reporting. I think for myself.
Indeed. So you make things up, I guess, because what I can only go off of is what the left and
what
the
did
right.
I make up, Tim? What did I make up? Everything I just said was factual. No, you're going to accuse me of making things up. No. What did I make up?
You made up that the FCC had a direct.
What did I make up? I didn't make up anything. Everything I said is what happened.
And an assumption that I think is not unreasonable, but the official reporting from left-wing sources and right-wing sources, I mean the more mainstream ones, is that the executives were largely behind Jimmy Kimmel. Advertisers, as well as affiliates, took issue with the comments he made, insinuating the assassin was somehow a Trump supporter, whether that was unintentional or otherwise. Jimmy Kimmel, as officially reported, did not want to apologize, didn't feel he needed to apologize, and wanted to further those comments criticizing MAGA for twisting his words. If we are going to make the assumption the principal reason his show was taken off the air was Donald Trump and the FCC, that would be us speculating, not going off the main reporting. And the only thing I've heard this whole time with even Ben Smith and everybody is the assumption that is true, despite the evidence suggesting it played a minimal role. So I think it's fine to assume that Brendan Carr saying that can be worrying to affiliates. However, if we're going to go off what the actual reporting says from liberal outlets and conservative outlets, Bob Iger, as well as other executives, asked Jimmy Kimmel to walk it back, and he said no. They said, okay, your show dropped 43% over 1 month. Maybe we shouldn't do this anymore.
And that right there, folks, I think it destroys the narrative, kind of, like all of that. That's what happened. And then there was so much backlash from the left that they capitulated to that backlash, that, oh, apparently people really want Jimmy Kimmel for some reason. The advertisers don't want it. I think it's Nexstar, because I think Sinclair is the one that capitulated and brought Jimmy Kimmel back. So I think Nexstar is the ones that they still haven't picked up Jimmy Kimmel. The advertisers say no. I think that it is what it is, folks. Like, let's not pretend that the intimidation didn't play any sort of role at all. Let's not pretend that merger deal didn't play any sort of role at all, because I'm sure it did. But I'm sure, once again, that's the straw that broke the camel's back. There was already an immense amount of pressure right there. Right? Jimmy Kimmel's ratings have been failing, slowly going down over many, many years. Like, it's just an obvious outcome of what's going to happen next. If your ratings continue to fall, eventually you're going to get canceled. That's what happened with Stephen Colbert. He's just not funny. He really isn't. I mean, unless you're Trump deranged, then sure, you might find some of that funny, but I don't find any of it in good humor at all. Like, none of it's funny. Most of it's in bad taste as well. Like, none of these people I think are very funny. I laugh at some of Jimmy Kimmel's jokes, to be honest with you. He does have a little bit of talent. But that format is kind of going downhill, if you ask me. And I just, this whole idea, I just love this argument that they still think that Brendan Carr, once again, in his personal capacity on a right-wing podcast, saying some, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Like, come on now. He once again, it wasn't in his official capacity. That changes the whole dynamic of this situation just completely, I think. If he would have come out in a press conference and made those statements, I can almost guarantee you that most people on the right would be railing against it. But, because it was on the Benny Show and it was in his personal capacity, right, was it kind of irresponsible, if you will, considering the fact that he is, the chair of the FCC and he pretty much rules the roost over there? Yeah, sure, maybe. I'll give him that one. It was a little bit irresponsible. But once again, it just doesn't have the full force of the federal government behind it. It just doesn't. And if you try to deny what I just said, I mean, you're just serving yourself delusions. That's it, folks. Let's keep going. I got one more clip for you guys.
People always use Neville Chamberlain as a historical reference. Also, by the way, yesterday was entirely on our managers. It was entirely Arteta's fault. I just wanted to say I'm too upset about that. Guys, can I just address this kerfuffle just now? Folks, both sides have been hypocrites, but it also means that both sides have been correct at a certain point, right? So what we need to do is make them be correct at the same time. That yes, who cares? Like at the end of the day, who cares? It's comedy, right? The president got really pissed off when Obama did the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He takes it very seriously. You know, if you're at one of my shows and you're in the front row, you know, you're in the splash zone. You might get burned, or the burn zone. Listen, guys, it's just comedy. It's not that important. You know what's more important? Like someone that is an air traffic controller. Comedians are like the way they're being treated as modern day philosophers and the most important people in society. It's dangerous.
But Adam, isn't it because
use of power is important?
No, I think speech is extremely
and also
important.
the joke had nothing to do with Charlie Kirk.
Well, it did.
Do people speak
nothing
English?
to do with Charlie Kirk.
Okay, well, look, first of all, I would say it wasn't a joke. Right, it was a political statement.
He said
it wasn't.
And the political statement out of
sympathy
for Charlie Kirk.
Look, Jimmy
by
Kimmel,
saying that Donald Trump he wasn't being sympathetic to his friend's death.
Exactly.
The point he was making, he said that the MAGA right, effectively, I spent the whole weekend trying to make out this guy was not one of them. The clear inference.
Both sides were.
Well, the clear inference from that statement that he made is that he probably was one of them. That's what caused all the offence. Now, Jimmy Kimmel...
No, it wasn't.
Jimmy Kimmel has... Well, just to be clear, Jimmy Kimmel's briefed that that's not what he intended, in which case, I would say it's incumbent on Jimmy Kimmel to come out and explain himself. At the moment, he's not given that explanation.
It's a joke.
Well, because it wasn't a joke,
was it?
What he said was the truth.
Sorry, John?
The least funny thing in the world is when a comedian explains a joke. Okay,
but it wasn't a joke.
Nothing kills the crowd like being like, "This is what I meant."
It wasn't a joke.
No, it's a freaking.
Actually,
joke.
It wasn't a joke.
No.
It was.
John.
It was a setup to a joke about Donald Trump's callous indifference to the murder of Charlie Kirk, which is the bit that got the laugh at the end of the beat.
Yeah, but John, would you have said what Jimmy Kimmel said if you were on mainstream television, and it was pre-recorded?
Myself?
Yeah.
I mean. Well, it's not whether I would have, it's would I have had the right to. And I would have without expecting to be fired. If they wanted to fire Kimmel,
you've got the right to, but would you have
chances to fire him?
You've got the right to, but would you have said it yourself?
I'd phrase it a bit different.
Don't have the right to.
I'm on TV right now. And I'm saying that Kimmel didn't say anything to besmirch Charlie Kirk. He didn't say anything that wasn't the truth. He made a couple of statements as a setup for his joke about Trump's callous response to a question about Charlie Kirk's murder. He said that MAGA was trying desperately to prove this guy wasn't one of theirs. That's true. He didn't say he's MAGA. He didn't even say he's a white guy from a white state raised by a MAGA family surrounded by guns. He could have said that. He didn't. He just said MAGA spent the whole weekend trying to pretend this guy's trying to claim this guy's not one of theirs and blaming everybody else. And my God, I've never heard, Piers, the pro-gun control people blamed this much for gun violence since the last time a Republican kid shot at a Republican figure, Donald Trump, a year ago. The people who want gun control in this country, they're not the ones you get to blame for this. So they could have fired him. You're right. Kimmel's ratings are in the basement with the demo. Maybe they did want to do this a long time. The timing of it, Piers, is what's going to damn all these players involved because they will all go down in infamy for being part of this censorship. If this goes through, there's no way this ends where it looks good. Kimmel's going to be a free speech hero. He's Library of Congress for the rest of his life. But Carr, Trump, these other folks, again, the comments were not about Kirk. They used it as the excuse.
I think the problem was it was ambiguous, and it was ambiguous enough that actually a lot of people did take the inference from it that he was making
the ones who wanted to.
That he was directly suggesting that actually this kid was a MAGA kid, and therefore they were trying to distance themselves. That's the problem with it. It was ambiguous.
No, I'm sorry, that's not correct. He was saying MAGA's trying desperately to claim this kid is not one of theirs. That was the reality of the weekend. That's what they were claiming.
John. The point I'm making was it was clearly ambiguous because half the country rose up in fury about what they thought he was saying. So my point is until you are assuming, John, you're assuming that your interpretation of it is the correct one. We don't know yet Because Kimmel hasn't
No,
said...
I'm just going by the words on the paper that I read, Piers. I'm just going by the exact words. I don't know what was in his heart, and it wasn't a joke at Mr. Kirk's expense, nor was it a joke denigrating this atrocious crime that happened last week. Again, this is all about weaponizing anger against people who had nothing to do with it. And that's what we've seen all week long. We saw our good friend Brian Kilmeade the week before call for the murder of homeless people in this country, that they should all be put to death, including thousands and thousands of veterans. I heard no outcry from our conservative brothers and sisters. Brendan Carr was completely undisturbed. That's not on their radar. They don't care that Brian Kilmeade called for the murder of thousands of American vets. They wanted to take this guy out. Iger wanted to merge. This was the excuse they used. Charlie Kirk's death is going to be exploited for a lot of things in the months to come.
This is the delusional world that these people live in, folks. This guy right here in the bottom half right there in the middle. This dude's delusional. First off, what Brian Kilmeade, what that whole cast of characters was talking about was these soft-on-crime governors, was these soft-on-crime policies in certain liberal districts that allow for crimes like Irina, I forget her last name right off the top of my head. I forget that young Ukrainian refugee that was murdered, I think on a train, on a rail car, whatever it's called, a soft rail or something like that. I forget what. It was a train car, regardless of that. Just murdered in cold blood right there by a mentally unstable guy that was allowed out of prison 14 times. That's what they were talking about. They weren't talking about just going rounding up. See, that's what he was pretending. They were talking about going rounding up. That's what Brian Kilmeade called for, rounding up homeless people and just taking them out of the game. That's not what he was talking about. He wasn't even talking about homeless people. He was talking about mentally ill people that are prone to violence, for crying out loud, after they get incarcerated. After they get incarcerated. That's called the death penalty, by the way. We have that in many, many states. He wasn't calling for rounding these people up. This is the delusional world that these people live in. He also tried to sneak in a statement talking about that young kid that tried to take out Trump last July or whatever. Called him a Republican. That's not true either. Once again, these people just don't live in reality. They just don't. They listen to the corporate press, they listen to the mainstream news, and take that for the gospel when these people are manipulating just about everything. They lie. They structure their news articles and their speech in such a way to make you think that, oh, Republicans are evil and Democrats are angels. That's what they try to make you do. That's how we get half of the country thinking that Republicans are evil and Democrats are angels. That's exactly how it is. The rest of the country, they're a little bit more skeptical of what these people in the mainstream say because they've lied to us so many times. We go and fact check. We go and look this stuff up. We live in reality. Right? Talk about living in your own bubble, if you will. These people refuse to believe that Democrats can do anything wrong. Refuse to believe it. And they'll take any chance to think, oh, look, Republicans are over here assassinating themselves. Trying to go in saying that we're blaming the gun control people. Are you kidding me? Well, it was the gun control people that took out Charlie Kirk. Of course we're going to blame the liberals because it was mainstream liberal ideology that led directly to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. This is why the paradigm shifted when this happened. Everything has changed. Nothing is going to be the same from now on. Charlie Kirk was all about sticking his hand out and saying, look, there's a different point of view out there that aligns better with logic, aligns better with reality than the type of nonsense that you're espousing over here. Let me tell you about it. That's it. He didn't spew hate. Once again, these people, they believe that facts are violence. If you say, once again, 13% of the population are responsible for 50% of the violent crime in this country, that is violence, that is racist, that's bigoted. Facts are bigoted. Facts are racist. It's the same party that try to make you believe that math is racist, that being on time, oh, that's whiteness. Like, showing up on time is whiteness. They've created this nonsense delusional dream world by living in their own bubble. You tell somebody something, they tell somebody else, they tell somebody else, and that person comes right back to the original person and affirms what that person originally said. That's called living in your own bubble. This is why Jimmy Kimmel and this guy right here think that those comments did not insinuate that this guy that took out Charlie Kirk was a Republican, was a conservative, was one of their guys. They're trying to desperately pretend that this guy wasn't one of their own. What do you think that means, my dude? People don't just say things and are 100% literal in their statements. That's what he's trying to make you believe. That Jimmy Kimmel's joke, right, his comedic monologue, has no inferences whatsoever. That people do not speak and infer certain things and try to not say certain things. Because why? Why do they do that? Especially on television and on YouTube? Well, because the FCC regulates those things. It's called content moderation, cat. It's fascinating, y'all. It's fascinating we can knock all these arguments down with just basic logic. That's it. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work, but most of the time it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy, folks, but that's all I got on this one. I want you guys to let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comments section. I find it fascinating. Once again, I get to come in from 20,000 feet, hindsight. I get to look at the whole battlefield and come down and swoop down with my arguments. So, maybe I have a bit of an advantage, but it is what it is, folks. You guys let me know what y'all think down in the comments section. Don't forget to smash that like button. It really, really helps the channel out a whole hell of a lot. You wouldn't believe how much it helps the channel out. So smash that like button. And if you're new around here, I'd love to have you on board. So click that subscribe button. And after you do that, click the share button and share this with anybody and everybody that you know. That's a big help as well. And the best way to help is click the join button, sign up, and become a member. That's absolutely the best way you can help this channel expand and grow. But once again, that's all I got, you guys. But I want you guys to remember one thing. Well, it's two things. That God is always with us. And he loves each and every one of you out there, regardless if you know him or not. So you guys try to remember that. And y'all try to have a good day. And stay logical. Peace.